Welcome back to another episode of Growing Up in the Wilds of Suburbia. This entire series, this channel is dedicated to being as authentic and sincere as I can be to the level of what I would consider in my life to be extraordinary clarity. But by no means do I feel like it's the most superior idea of integrity and honesty. It's a journey. It's a journey of discovery. I'm constantly exploring myself through. And I nearly never blame anyone else for anything. And if ever, I don't really recall the last time I actually blamed somebody for something as much as me turning it to bear my responsibility in whatever that situation was, or is, if it's in the moment. So it's a different approach to the way of living, right? It's a way of it's living with the intention of fully living, right? Living all out. I don't really live with regret, although I feel a pulling emotionally towards regret with the most recent experiences, with the recent breakup. I feel a pulling for regret, but that's part of the grieving cycle. So with that, today's episode's going to be on being another's fantasy, although I originally listed this as being a fantasy man. I think it's not really driven so much by gender as much as it is driven by perception. And with that, I want to make some distinctions before I really get into this conversation. The first distinction I want to make is I don't mean a deceiver. And you can absolutely be a deceiver with the idea that you're a fantasy person, but that's you trying to be something that you're not and lying in order to achieve that goal. I'm not speaking about that. I can speak about that in another episode, as it's a whole nother thing to intentionally and willfully deceive and mislead. It's another thing when you live as close to your own personal desires and honesty about those desires. That's different, but you're practicing, so sometimes it may occur to another person as if there was deception, but if you yourself are not within that intention to deceive another, but you're practicing living into that the person that you want to be, right? Then it's a practice. And again, it may be seen as being a deceiver or a liar or whatever, but that also has to do with what people know of you, what you previously were to them or who you were to them, and or also their attachment to what you're supposed to be. Now, but that is different than intentionally going, I'm going to tell this person this in order to achieve that. That's deception within its purest form. Not the other side of it, which is that practicing into living my life in such a way that I be this other person. Kind of as a snake is young before it becomes an adult, it genetically knows that where it wants to go, and it's got actions in order to achieve that, including shedding skin, but also daily actions, the habit of eating is part of that process to get to that point, and genetically allows them to get there. So when it comes down to our own desires, it's easy to have the depth of, I really want to experience this, whatever it is. Fantasies can be about anything. It doesn't have to be sexual. It can be about the companionship of another. Now, where I have spoken about this at length in videos, as well as to the people in my life and people that discuss things in my life or in person, is the distinction between loving who you are and loving the idea of who you are. And that's a very, very common issue in relationships. So few people love who you are when they declare love. They most people will declare that they love who they want you to be or who they believe you are, the idea of you. And that idea of you can be it doesn't have to actually be something that you've ever created. It could be, the conversations and the conversations that this person has had for so many years, as they formed this idea in their youth. I want this in my life. Strong, stable man with, plenty of money, who's ready to settle down, and, you got this list of things, and vice versa. I can speak more intimately and powerfully about the expression of what I hear women say that they want. And then obviously from my own position of what I want in my partners. And that be a lot of things, stability, flexibility, and I mean mental and, physical, doesn't hurt, but the mental, emotional flexibility of dealing with multiple different circumstances, regardless of the circumstance, but to hold true to what the relationship's core values had become. To take a step back for a second so I can add to that, the core values, you need to understand the three levels of core values. There's the immediate I core value, and this is something that I got from Paul Chek from my years of study of his material. So an I core value is the things that you need to take care of you so that you feel that you love, care, and cherish who you are. That's an I core value. What time you need to be to bed, what kind of food you need to eat, what do you read, what is your educational pieces that you do for yourself that makes you feel like you're progressing into your future, what kind of leisure things do you need to do in order to feel like you're getting the right amount of rest and recovery and or enjoyment in life, music, there's a lot of things that can create that center value, that I value. A we value is what you do in a relationship, in a well-formulated relationship, where both parties understand their I values to the point of the ability to speak it, to teach each other what the I values are, and that drastically reduces disagreements and arguments in relationships because people understand each other better. Like Love Languages is a great book, 5 Love Languages. And it goes over the distinctions of how people express emotion and love for one another. How they express it and how they prefer to receive it do not always line up, and in most instances, in my experience, they don't line up that way. Just because you may like gifts as a way of acknowledging you in the relationship does not mean that you enjoy giving gifts. So it's a great book. I do suggest that you read it if you really want to expand on that. So the second was the we value. Again, you need the I value for both people in order to get to a we value, and that is between two people. So core values at a we level, meaning two people, we. Once that is solid, stable, and understood, then the world can be introduced to that relationship in such a way that the world has an easier way of respecting the relationship. Doesn't mean that it will, but it just means that it has an easier method to respect the relationship, as well as the relationship has a higher tolerance to the world's experiences, the potential assault that can come at times over from the world.
2 miles, take the 66th Street North exit toward Florida 693 South, St. Pete Beach.
Thanks. So as far as the values go there, when you get into the next level, so it's I, we, and the last one is all. And it's an all core value, meaning that you and your partner have such integrity with who you are as an individual, who you are as a relationship, and then it's who your relationship is to the world. It creates a stronger bond because two people have a deeper, intimate connection because they understand so much more about each other than they do about the idea of what they want. And the majority of relationships are set in the place of, I want to experience these characteristics. And those things are loving the idea of a person. And you're just going through life almost playing a lottery type of approach to find that person, to get the one in a lottery approach, or to coerce whoever you're with into becoming who your idea of them is versus who they truly are. No, you don't want to coerce somebody into change. that can it can backfire heavily on you. But to have the person genuinely change for their own desires.
Take the 66th Street North exit toward Florida 693 South, St. Pete Beach.
Thanks. So, pardon while I take these 2 lanes. Okay. And one more. All right, I've got it. So, those are...
Take the 66th Street North exit, then merge onto 66th Street North.
Have to forgive me, but I do need to stop this as I am familiar with where I am. Okay, so with that, that's the groundwork to create the concepts of a fantasy person. Now, a fantasy person for this video's sake, and in genuine and in general, I don't look as a fantasy person as somebody who lies and creates a false reality to other people. I look as a fantasy person as somebody that it's a fantasy to the other person. It's like, the 50 Shades of Grey thing. When that movie came out, my dating world exploded in the sense that I was learning variables about myself, being my preferences sexually and or in relationships overall. I think that was something that did introduce a lot of people to something. There was a lot of, predominantly women were attracted and drawn into that movie because of a lot of values and variables that come out of it, which is, the dominating kind of guy. Now, of course, this individual is incredibly wealthy. He is the guy to be tamed, although he's taming women. So there's the female version of the hero's journey. To tame the man, to help change him for what is conceived to be the better, which is the love story concept, where he goes from being that man into being her partner. And that evolution that really seems to draw the fantasy out of women. Now, am I saying is 100% in general, all women? No. But it does seem to have almost like a really deeply embedded value that, in my experience, occurs fairly often. So that person really lives in the state of being an idea to the other person, but it's an idea with passion infused, because with it being a fantasy person, passion is infused with it. So it's passion and the idea. It's the mystery of it. And then when that starts to fade to some extent, as it starts to draw down because of familiarity, which is what happens in relationships, the vigor in the beginning kind of fades over time because of the familiarity that you build with the person, the expectations of specific behaviors, and the knowing of how that person be within a large margin of accuracy. This person will do X, Y, and Z, and well, now that I have a motorcycle in my video, so the individual hopefully YouTube does not catch that song and strike my video, although I happen to enjoy AC/DC, but anyway, it's just YouTube is a bit particular, so hopefully it's not that loud. So anyway, the idea of a person, and I got completely derailed because I was just cut off in traffic by a gentleman blasting his AC/DC on his motorcycle. But to each their own. Just back to the train of thought here. So there's a great degree of desire that comes out of it, because there's, in my personal experience, there's this great release, this experience that in this scenario, I be capable of taking somebody from what they consider to be their normal experiences in intimate settings and turning it into something that leaves, and this is not a brag. This is nothing like that. I'm not intending to come across in any way like, oh, look at me, what I've done, anything like that. This is more this is more for the it's interesting whenever you notice something that takes your attention that you're not necessarily the most fond of at the moment, like the motorcycle blasting AC/DC and revving his engine, then another pulls up right next to you on the other side. Anyway, yeah, so again, not bragging. That's not the intention of this video. I don't need that kind of validation in this. It's more of, first off, understanding that you can say, the experiences the other person has. A typical experience when you first meet somebody does have that huge value of, look at what I found, and the idea of who you want them to be, and then the verification of if that person actually be that person. And then there's the exploration and discovery of it, and that becomes very exciting. Brings people to a higher degree of, anticipation, which anticipation typically leads to, especially in a sexual setting, the potential and the heightened sense of an erotic release in the sexual capacity. But it usually is led up by other variables that are there, not just the blanket act of sexual experience. So now, I'm not saying that what I am actually out to do with this video is that there may be benefits, and there typically are benefits to being a fantasy person, like for myself being a fantasy man. And again, not a brag, and it's a somewhat of a recent realization. I be a certain person, is with an integrity. I'm a gentleman whenever people meet me, especially whenever I'm in public. But the other side is really not people's business. But I seem to change roles in a way that comes across as pretty satisfying for women that line up with that. So there is costs to it as well, because it's so incredibly easy to dismiss who the person really is, but to get caught up, and again, what I would call the women, a woman's hero concept, right? Like the man may slay the dragon, the knight may come and rescue the princess by slaying the dragon, but the damsel in distress is who's out looking, right? She's the one in need. But once she's rescued, then it's for her to rescue him. And that's the other part of the story that you typically don't see. And for her to rescue him is to settle his soul, right? To calm him into being satisfied in life without needing to continue the hero's journey that'll inevitably have him meet, obviously, more princesses, but also potentially the dragon of his demise. Is eventually the knight gets too old and can't fight the dragon the same. So, in the princess's hero journey is to save him basically from himself. And that's what typically women seem to want, is to say tame sounds manipulative and kind of insincere almost, or like a possession of ownership, taking the person's autonomy away and turning them into what they can possess. And that's not a healthy place for relationships to be. It's great to have ownership and possession over the agreements of the relationship, but not the person that you're in the relationship with, because that's a challenging relationship scenario. Now, with the continuation of this conversation, as I just found, got cut off again here. The costs of it is to be in a relationship with somebody that wants you to behave in a certain way. They go through their process of the hero's journey for the princess. There are specific variables and values that are associated with that. That be like, the person wants, their behaviors change to the point of creating more emotional attachment. and after that emotional attachment is is assessed and stable in the relationship, as it should be, right? Like as relationships continue on, emotional attachments set in because we wish to see something throughout time. It's how they make us feel about ourselves and how we feel about them, but really it comes back to how we feel about ourselves around them that gives us that, the release of, the serotonin, the dopamine release and things that come with the deeper intimate relationship connections and the bonding. So bringing that in that's completely normal, and it, in my opinion, should happen. It's at a timeline though that is desirable and understandable, although relationships or emotions don't have a fuse, right? They don't have like, well, you know what, I've got a 10-second fuse, and then once that goes off, boom, I'm in love, right? It's not like that. It's more just it happens when it happens. But sometimes it occurs out of need versus want. And when that happens as need instead of want, it can create an imbalanced relationship where a lot of coercion and punishments occur. So punishments as in, well, you didn't do this, so therefore I'm not going to give you affection of some sort. That's the coercive element whenever the time to mold your partner comes into play, which is, if you don't, show me 100% attention when we're in public, you looked at the waiter wrong, things like that, whatever, waitress, whatever it is, then there's the, well, I'm going to withhold affection, I'm going to, change who I am. It's understandable when it's changing who they are through their own emotional process, but the problem with that is a lot of times that emotional process is part of the coercive technique. People don't typically do this intentionally. They do it through their emotional brain or their emotional aspects. I don't feel comfortable with this, so therefore I remove or withhold affection. Or whatever the intimate language is that you're rewarding your partner with, or that your partner has grown to be attached to, experiencing, and they ultimately don't want you to be upset if they truly care deeply about you. So they give the are you okay conversations. So I have long recognized the emotional coercion that takes place after the honeymoon concepts have calmed down, or the fantasy has become more of a reality. Doesn't mean that the fantasy behaviors that got it to that point turns into, the humdrum and basics that people typically fall into with long-term relationships, marriages and things, where the greatest complaint I typically hear is, from divorced people, is that their sex life lost its flair, lost its excitement. That happens, but if you're not well established in who you are, comfortable with that, and actually have a mature sex life, you're likely to experience that over time. And you get drawn into other things that distract you from those needs or those desires, actually more desires. But it is a need for the relationship so that the bonding continues. You could have work, it could be family, it could be your social events, whatever it is, that pulls you away from that intimate bonding and connecting. It's incredibly valuable. Oxytocin is a bonding hormone, and relationships, if that's not a regular hormone released between the two, it can start to dwindle out a sex life, which is the thing that typically women are not overly fond of. Losing that, but neither partner really is. Men or women aren't really fond of losing that flare, if you will, that excitement, spark, if you will, the flame, whichever way you want to refer to it. But the other side is the elements that come with it. There's a degree of, this person is capable of doing something with me that I have never experienced before, and doing it in such a way that they care deeply about my degree of satisfaction. Again, speaking from that personal experience, that is how I am as a person, that I care greatly that the people around me experience the things that they wish to experience, but I don't intervene in specific scenarios in my personal life or professional life as much as I help train and develop and give insights. But on the intimate side, I'm far more, no pun intended, hands-on, if you will. There's a great deal of responsibility I take that I be satisfying that other person. So that can create a great degree of masking or covering your partner or my partner in the scenario truest self, because of the scarcity, the rarity of having that kind of connection. So as far as a fantasy person, it can create a pattern of usage, where the person feels, not necessarily, I don't really feel used. I'm a bit more self-aware than that. But the idea that, it's finding those deep, meaningful, and long-term relationships can be more challenging because of the degree of insincerity that comes with fantasy. Because I will change this behavior even long-term in order to continue to experience this. So, I can't go on any longer, actually. I've got to my destination, and I'm now out of integrity because I am 3 minutes late, which would actually put me at 5 by the time I get inside. So thank you again for watching another episode of Growing Up in the Wilds of Suburbia. This was on being a fantasy in someone else's life. I can easily do more videos on this subject because it is a very in-depth subject and long subject, if you will, because it's so incredibly important to people and their experiences in life that they find meaningful sexual expression and other aspects. There are other things to the fantasy person, not just the sexual stuff. So I think the movie 50 Shades of Grey did a pretty good job at a superficial level introducing that. But at a deeper level, I can go further in to explain how there's a lot more details and values that can actually be more satisfying to a person. So till next time, Chad Everett Brochures, actually Sir Chad Everett Brochures. And this is Growing Up in the Wilds of Suburbia. We'll catch you next time. See ya.